Hawaii and welcome. This week we travel to Hot Springs National Park, ancestral homelands of the Quapaw Nation. The Quapaw story is often told through the lens of anthropologists and archaeologists, but this week we caught up with documentary filmmaker Brooke Bierhaus as she debuts Regeneration of Land and Culture, the Quapaw story at the 30th Annual Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. We hope you enjoy.
So my name is Brooke Bierhaus. I'm a documentary filmmaker, a visual storyteller, and I'm now based in Northwest Arkansas. And I try to work on stories that bridge cultural gaps, but also that show a space of humanity and nature and how we're all connected. So that's where I tend to do a lot of my focus with documentary filmmaking. So we are in Hot Springs and I'm so excited about it. So Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival is the longest running North American nonfiction film festival. 30 years running, and we are very fortunate to have the short documentary that I worked on with Quapaw Nation called Regeneration of Land and Culture screening at the film festival, and actually it is the world premiere. So I cannot wait for people to see Quapaw represented in this space. I think that the film itself is a look at reintroduction of the buffalo back to native land and what that means to Quapaw Nation as a whole. So, I'm very thankful that y'all gave me the opportunity to work with you on this narrative, and I hope that I represented you well. And I think that people are going to really see more Native voices as experts, and that's what I want to do, is not just have representation for the sake of it. I think that our Native brothers and sisters are the first caretakers or the first protectors of these lands, and that knowledge is something that we all need to really listen to. I think it was a little bit of chance and circumstance on my part as a filmmaker. When I moved to Northwest Arkansas 2 years ago, I started to look into an adoption that happened on my paternal ancestor side. And one of the adoptions out of the residential school was intersected a lot with Quapaw Nation, and I kept seeing Quapaw coming up, and I looked on a map. I'm an hour away from Quapaw, and I started to see a lot of the work that you all were doing, specifically for the buffalo and that reintroduction. And my previous work, one of my first jobs right out of college, was with the Smithsonian National Zoological Park. So that was during a time when they were talking a lot about the American bison, and so I had this whole introduction and background on how bison, in this term, were able to combat climate change. And I wanted to hear more from not just scientists and researchers, but I wanted to hear from the first relatives, of the buffalo, and Quapaw really were the first relatives of that. And I think you do touch on that a lot in the film, as brothers, talking about that significance. So that was my first introduction in really interest in doing this film. And then whenever I reached out to the communications team, I reached out to Mitch, to everyone here at Quapaw Nation that was very open and welcoming to me to be able to share this and hopefully be able to create something special, and I hope that we did. Whenever I had reached out about working on this film and this narrative, I knew that Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival would be the place that I would want this film to premiere. And that's because we are on ancestral lands of Quapaw. And I think that it's sort of coming full circle and saying, this Hot Springs is a place of importance. It's a place of spirituality, and people come here from all over the world to see the national park. They come here to soak in the thermal springs, and why are we not represented as modern day representation in this area? And so I thought, this is where I want the film festival. I want this story to really be broadcasted and shared. So I was very intentional about where Regeneration of Land and Culture would be world premiered, and so this feels very right. The film festival here feels very different than any other film festival I've been to as a filmmaker, and even just as an attendee to a lot of film festivals, but specifically here, I get to experience it as a filmmaker, and I feel like Hot Springs does a really good job of making every creative person feel very special, but also like they're heard. And you know, when you talk to people sometimes and you can see their eyes kind of glance and they're looking somewhere else, here it's very intentional and they look at you and they listen. And it's not just waiting for you to stop speaking so that they can talk. You can see that they're really listening and taking into consideration what you want to get out of this festival, what you've put your heart and your soul into, and you feel very uplifted here. And so it's a really special place to be. That I'd love to say to folks back in Quapaw right now that haven't had a chance to see the film, but one thing that I want to make sure I say is thank you. I think a lot of members didn't know at the time that I was filming, but even when I had my camera out and no one else was with me, but they'd come along, I was filming along the buffalo in the fields on the outside by the gates and the fences, and I had a few tribal members come up and be like, "Hey, what are you working on?" And then I'd tell them, and instead of that feeling of you shouldn't be here, it was more of like, welcome to our land, like thank you for what you're doing, and I hope that that I'd love to see it afterwards. It's a very much like, we know that you're here and we're happy that you are, but also like we want to see it, and so I want you all to be able to see that soon. I think we are going to have another screening specifically for Quapaw, but more than anything, I'd just like to say thank you, and then also that, I hear you and I am listening and always trying to learn as much as I can, not just about my own ancestral lineage, but just about, where there's some disconnect between natives and non-natives, and I'm here always to listen. I always try to keep an open mind of what I'm going to find, not just about the narrative itself, but about my own journey as a filmmaker. And I think that this project specifically, this film, really opened up a lot more questions in my life and in my own ancestral lineage that we talked about before. It brought up a lot more questions that I think I'd like to dig into, but it's also had a lot of healing, as you mentioned, for me as a daughter and a granddaughter, and I think my father's ancestors a lot for bringing me to this point where I'm able to meet with you and to have these conversations and heal a lot of that trauma that's led to this disconnect that I have. So I think that I'd like to follow that a little bit on my own journey in future projects, whether that's locally in Arkansas and Oklahoma in this area, or maybe it's abroad. But I think that what I've learned with this film will carry with me into all these other projects. The encouragement for emerging filmmakers, I always like to say, is that listening and asking questions is what's going to get you further. You don't need to put on a facade that you know everything. People love to share their knowledge when they know that you're listening. And so as a filmmaker, I think the fact that I don't mind being seen as, silly or not knowing something, because if I'm able to ask it, then I know for next time, and I can learn and I can teach someone else. So when you remove yourself from feeling selfish or self-centered for asking a question, and you think of it more as, once I know, then I can teach. I think that's really important. When I met Grace Goodeagle, I was immediately just transfixed. She is such a powerhouse. She has so much knowledge, and I loved her just vibrancy for life and for what she does and what she did, what she does, and what she continues to do for Quapaw Nation and for people as a whole, and especially even for women. As a former chairperson of Quapaw Nation, she really she was kind of had me a little bit fangirling by the end of it, But I really enjoyed getting out into the fields as well. Meeting Frosty was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed being in the buffalo herd, and those are some of my favorite memories, was really just being able to get out into the fields, but also have that special time with the elders and with Chairman Byrd and with Quapaw members, and it was really special to me. This project really challenged me in a lot of ways. This was one of the first projects that I was able to bring on an impact producer. I was able to get funding to have this film have a life outside of the film festival circuit or outside of the screen. And I will say that's a lot to do with, Quapaw communications team, with exposure labs. They gave a huge grant for us to get, an education packet for screening, and we were able to to have these tough dialogue that will help other viewers who maybe don't have as much knowledge or time to dedicate towards researching more about this topic. And I think that this will probably enhance that for them by having this screener and education packet that I'm able to do. So I think in terms of growing, this really just allowed me to bring on and make it more collaborative than a lot of other films that I had to do a lot of work by myself because of budget, and this time it was more of a group effort, and I really loved that. I think that that was important for me. I feel like sometimes with filmmakers, we have this view of extractive storytelling, and we don't mean to, but I think a lot of filmmakers tend to go into stories with a very extractive view, and it was very important for me that this be I may have coined this term, I don't know for sure, but regenerative storytelling. It's able to have full transparency, it benefits the community, it also benefits the filmmaker, and there's a lot of conversation throughout it, and it helps with growth, and it all comes full circle. And so for me, regenerative storytelling is something that I'm going to keep on doing in my practice, and I think that it's something that filmmakers should really look into and be conscious of not being very extractive from communities who already are sharing that gift of time and knowledge.